Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, Tim and Brian discuss Japanese maple mutation.
Howdy, y'all, and welcome to the MrMaple Show. I'm Tim. I'm sitting here with Brian. We're going to be talking to you about Japanese maple mutations. Guys, we'll go through and sort of lay out all the different types of mutations, different things to look for in Japanese maples. If you're maple nuts like we are, and you just love Japanese maples, if you're crazy, if you're part of the maple mafia, you're going to love hearing about Japanese maple mutations. I love the things that make them different, that make them special, that make them unique. And, you know, not all mutations are created equal. Some are good, some are bad. So we're going to go through and discuss the good, bad, and the ugly about Japanese maple mutations.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in to the podcast today. We always love getting in here and talking about plants. And this is a cool way for us to, you know, just highlight certain things about Japanese maple. Specifically today, we're going to talk about mutations. This gets me excited because we start breaking down and get into kind of the science behind what makes so many cultivars so collectible out there. You know what I mean? Like those certain characteristics that we all have fallen in love with. This gives us a deeper understanding of what that process is and what we're looking for when it comes to creating a new cultivar.
I mean, it's just like the other day, Brian was looking through the greenhouses at some summer golds and said, Tim, check out this mutation, check out this variegated sport.
Yeah.
On summer gold.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's crazy. You see a mutation happening right there on the leaf itself. You see something going on and it looks consistent and you're like, hey, this might turn into something.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you know, what's cool is that once you kind of learn what to look for, you start to pick up on it a lot. I know we've talked about it over the years where it's like once, you know, Tim really started getting into brooms, he's, you know, driving down the road, hopefully safely, but looking at every tree he drives by, you know, to see if there's a broom up in there or something.
I need one of those Teslas that just can like drive by itself so I can just like stare up at the trees, at the witch's brooms. I was half tempted just to buy a Tesla just for witch's broom hunting.
Right.
Drive down the interstates. Yeah. We don't have to look at the road.
Yeah. We could write it off as a business expense.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
All go on a you know, a little
broom hunt,
road trip and broom hunt. And I like it, man.
Well, guys, we're going to be getting into some of the cool mutations on Japanese maples. These are the things that collectors live for, finding something special and different than everything else that's out there. Mutations. I mean, let's just hit a little bit. Why do they happen? We don't really know. Sometimes they can be caused by bugs, bugs carrying a virus. Sometimes they can be happen from solar radiation. Chemicals can play, you know, if you accidentally slightly hit your tree with a weed killer and it didn't kill it somehow, which most of the time it's going to kill, like 99.9% of the time it's going to kill your Japanese maple. There's a chance that chemical could cause a mutation on the Japanese maple. So there's a lot of crazy things out there in this world that can cause mutations, and it's a lot of different environmental factors that come into play, and some of the genetics of the Japanese maples sort of plays a role in that as well. Let's just get into one of the types of sports. When we use the term sport, we typically mean a mutation. There's a mutation that's happened in what we see going on with the plant. Some may say that the mutation may not actually be a big difference in the genetics, but it may be a difference in the genetic expression. So what we're seeing from those genetics is expressed differently, and that can be a type of mutation in itself. But there are different types of variegated sports. I mean, let's just talk a little bit about some of the sports we find on Macawi types. I mean, think about something like snow kitten.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing newer cultivar out there. We have a white and pink variegated form of Macawi Etsubusa. pretty wild to think of it. I mean, the odds of finding that and then being able to propagate it and produce it and get it out there, there's pretty slim odds. I mean, honestly, like me and Matt and Tim talk about all the time, the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds that you look through to find something like that, or a plant that would have the chance to have that sport on it is pretty rare. And so when we find these certain characteristics, these mutations that we're talking about, it stands out, especially if you know what to look for, because it's like there's something different happening there. You're like, whoa, what's going on with this leaf? I have this weird white or pink expression like you were talking about happening. And this isn't what I'm, expected to see on a cultivar like that.
Yeah, I mean, Snow Kitten's got that pink and white swirling variegation where it's different on each and every leaf. And you just see on that green leaf, pink and white swirls, pink and white splotches. That is just outstanding. It was found as a variegated sport, but the sport was found because a greenhouse collapsed at Larry Stanley's. And up through the snow, they say, stuck this variegated sport. And then they grafted it, and then it became, eventually down the line, became what is known as Snow Kitten, sometimes called Yukiyama, Yamayuki. I think Elmer was a code name for it in the beginning. But such a cool little dwarf Japanese maple that's now got that variegation. There are different styles of variegation, and there's different levels of stability. But, a lot of times variegated sports may not be as stable as a seedling. So a seedling often will have a sport, like a variegation, I should say. A seedling will often may have a variegation, and those may be a little more consistent. But, I've heard that depending on where the bud sport breaks out of the bud, may actually make it more stable. So some interesting science behind there. I'm no scientist on it, but I've got a lot of experience with these different types of sports. Kryptonite, another variegated sport found on Macawi Etsubusa. Completely different than what we see with Snow Kitten.
Right. Yeah. It's weird how these different mutations all have unique characteristics. I mean, we've got a list here that we're going to go over with you guys, and it's so cool to think about all these different forms. Like, we're sitting here kind of racking our brains like, all right, what are the different types of mutations that we see, and they're consistent? A lot of these, because of those specific mutations, became cultivars because of that characteristic. And with kryptonite, I think it's really cool that you have this like lighter green on green variegation, and it makes that leaf just really, each leaf is individual. You know what I mean? Like no leaf, two leaves are the same. Very interesting how it mutates that leaf and structure.
And something that's different about the mutation that you see on Snow Kitten is Snow Kitten, you get that bigger typical Macawa leaf, but it's variegated like an Arita no Nishiki. You get that pink and white. On kryptonite, it is also a variegated sport, but you get a different style variegation completely. You get a more marginalized variegation that becomes more prominent as the summer goes on, where Snow Kitten is fairly variegated right out the gate.
Right.
And I mean, just completely different styles. And with kryptonite, the leaf is a little more elongated than your typical, and a little more narrow than your typical Macawa leaf.
Right.
And so while the two are both variegated sports on Macawi Etsubusa, completely different.
Yeah, and that's what's cool about how these sports happen. It's like it's kind of just a chance, a moment of time that this happens. Everything has to kind of collide together in just the right way for these mutations to take place. And then whether they're consistent or stable is another big part of it too, because I know we've talked about before with like Summer Gold. Sometimes it can pretty consistently throw out sports, but they're not always very stable. So you kind of, even though we have a variegated sport in that situation, it's not one that you can consistently reproduce out in the trade.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is when you find a mutation, you have to graft it. You have to see how that tree produces from graft, so that when you produce it, it actually turns into something, and then you have to evaluate that for 5 to 7 years and evaluate it off of the 5 to 7 closest things. I mean, that's what we do here at Mr. Maple in the evaluation process, to making sure trees are different and stand out. Now, another variegated sport on Macawi Etsubusa, lily pad. This is a sport that was found in Boring, Oregon, on the side of a Macawi Etsubusa. And it's probably, the variegation reminds me of something like Dr. Seuss, where the leaf is slightly, it's elongated, but it gets these little bubbles around the leaf of dark green. Very different than what we see with kryptonite, which kryptonite, the leaf, I would describe it more like Manino Sato, where it's a very clear defined margins,
Right.
Very elongated. Lily pad is more like the Dr. Seuss. I mean, it's got that compact form. But the other thing that is unique about this variegated sport is instead of growing like a typical Macawa, it flattens out and creates this little flat top shape where it gets the name lily pad.
Right. So sometimes when you're looking at a sport, you're not just seeing characteristics expressed in the leaves, but you may also be seeing it in growth habit and things like that, which is really wild to think that it can get that far down into the genetics of a plant and change and alter all of those different characteristics. And which leads us right here to Pandemonium, which I'm really excited about this because here we have Red Panda was the seedling that was found from Macawi etsubusa with red spring color. And then you get a variegated sport on a seedling from Macawa. So, I mean, it's next level stuff. And we're getting into the weeds here with the science of plants. And I love that because it's so unexpected, I think. You know, I think people don't realize sometimes what all goes into, you know, these different cultivars and like, how did you come up with this? What is this? You know, I've got this crazy, weird variegated plant, like, and then this is how they originated with these sports.
Yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with the cultivar Beni Mako, a variegated sport on Beni Mako is Beni Fushigi or Beni Kamachi. They're the same sport that's happened on the same tree that are very similar. And the leaf is a little smaller, a little more cut back, and a little more kind of mutated looking.
Yeah.
And that is what Pandemonium is to Red Panda.
Right.
I mean, the leaf is a little more cut back, a little more mutated looking. And it's kind of like the Beni Kamachi version of a Macawa, a red Macawa sport. Intense colors on it. You know, we're still in that evaluation process with Pandemonium, but we're producing it and continuing to watch it as we do it because it's a fun tree. I mean, Red Panda, a sport on Red Panda.
Right.
Why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and the original Pandemonium was a sport that was found on the original Red Panda.
Right.
You know, on all the time on Macawa seedlings, you may find variegation or different unique traits. It's always important to watch across any tree, if it's grafted or a seedling, for a sport of some kind. And on the original Red Panda, there was a sport on it that was Pandemonium. Yeah, and then we grafted it and then isolated those genes out. And then all of a sudden, now we've got some stock plants that are purely the Pandemonium. And it's just fun to watch and evaluate as it goes through.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how that a lot of these Macawa variances are prone to sport. You know, like you see it a little bit with like Japanese Princess and Mayday, how they have this, like, sometimes they'll get this weird, like, subtle variegation to it. And you're like, wow, has this thing got variegation? I didn't know, you know, and it's like the plant is in this weird state of like almost getting ready to like throw a sport genetically. The compound makeup of it, it's an odd thing.
Well, Dan Himes, who we've featured here on our YouTube channel before, we've interviewed with him about his trips to Japan. One of my trips to Buchholz Nursery, he came over and we were discussing this very thing. And he said that the way he describes it is that a plant leaf basically has different layers. And if a mutation happens where one of those layers is removed, then you see that the pink on Japanese Princess was really a variegation, but you're just now seeing the variegation once that layer's been removed. And so when you're seeing that, you may actually be seeing some of that layer removed. Now, whether that's stable or not is still up for debate. I know maple collector Aaron Dragseth had before a tree called Phantasm that we grafted from scion from one of his seedlings that was doing that. It's all, sometimes that can be environmental.
Right.
I know that you can promote more of that by adding more phosphorus to your fertilization. And you can intensify that. But it's interesting that sometimes if that layer's removed, if that theory holds up, that just makes me geek out because I'm like, what else can we do what layers can we remove to see, fun variegation? Yellow, one of my favorite colors in the garden, that's a variegation. Yellow itself, when you see Orange Dream, when you see Summer Gold, Dragon Master, Hot Blonde, that's variegation.
Yeah.
And we see it as a solid color, but those are very likely to throw mutations. And that, like you've talked about on Summer Gold, we found multiple styles of variegation on Summer Gold. I mean, there's some that look like anti-rain.
Right.
And then there's some that have that splotched variegation in that. And then there's that one that you found that's almost like a Geisha Gone Wild version of a yellow, which is pretty crazy.
That is crazy, man. And, and Matt and Tim, they've been doing this so long, like they have a very trained eye when it comes to this sort of thing. And they've seen so many examples of these mutations over the years that I think you guys understand it a little bit better. You know what I mean? The average person may not notice it. When they're just looking at a tree, I've heard you talk about it. We've walked by this tree 100 times, never noticed this broom in it. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of these different mutations are easy to overlook. You may not notice them at first. It may take time for them to develop and just kind of, really create a presence in whatever tree it is that you may be looking at. But it's interesting to think of yellow as a form of variegation. I like that idea.
That's why it's fun for me, because when I see the variegated sports happening on Summer Gold, it just makes me want to look through more and more yellow trees to find what new unique mutations we can have, and makes me wonder what we can do to remove maybe that first layer on some of these yellows and see what's behind the curtain,
behind the
scenes, because that gets me to geeking out. Anti-rain, we mentioned that already. Sport that was found off of Summer Gold by Dick Vandermaat. It was introduced by Dick Vandermaat and some of our other friends in Holland. Benny Sheehan, that was also a sport. Benny Sheehan was a sport found by Harold Johnson on a seedling. You see all these times people selling red seedlings, and they're like, oh, these are blood good seedlings. They're not ever really blood good seedlings. Yeah. They might be seedlings from a red Japanese maple, and they're throwing that term out there very loosely. But Harold was walking into a garden center, and as the story goes by Donnie Tomlin, he was looking through the red seedlings, and then the Benny Sheehan sport was hanging off the side of one of them.
Wow.
And Benny Sheehan got introduced into the trade. In fact, he patented it for 20 years as well. But it's heat tolerant. I mean, it's one of the most heat tolerant trees you can get. And it's a variegated sport. I mean, it's got a mutated leaf that's completely different than the red Japanese maple it was on. And then it's got that sort of sickle kind of yellow green kind of color that just gives this a unique shape and unique texture.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was sitting here thinking, and I wanted to ask you, so when you get into the red forms of Japanese maples, you don't see as many variegated sports in the red forms. You see a lot more in yellows and greens, things like that. But the reds, you have Lillian's Jewel, which we believe it was probably a seedling more than a sport.
Yeah, it was actually, according to Jonathan Savlich, it was a sport on a seedling.
A sport on a seedling. Okay.
So he had a red seedling that had a sport on the side of it.
Right.
And then grafted from that, and then, grafted continually from the best variegated parts until he had a nice stable tree, which became Lillian's Jewel. But the unique thing is one like Geisha Gone Wild. See, Geisha Gone Wild is a sport that has red and pink variegation, but it was found on a pink Japanese maple, Geisha.
Right.
And Geisha Gone Wild is fairly sun tolerant. Geisha is not. And so you've got this low growing shrub tree in Geisha that is just, it throws these little kind of sickle leaves every once in a while with a little dot of red.
Right.
A little curve of red. But, we're talking a tree needs protection from the hot afternoon sun, needs extremely good drainage, it's often overwatered because it's such a slow grower. And then Geisha Gone Wild itself is a variegated sport that happened on the side of that. And that same sport also happened in New Zealand, became Gwendolyn's Rose Delight, which is Shiraz. And so they're similar, very similar sports that happened on the same tree. And so certain trees are more genetically prone to throw some of these mutations than other trees as well. But with Geisha Gone Wild, we have a tree now that's upright, 8 to 10 foot in 10 years, can handle the sun, is one of those trees that is just more landscape usable than Geisha.
Yeah, it's almost like, and I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head here, but it's almost like a reversion, but not like a complete reversion. It's like trying to revert back to like a red leaf, but it only does it like part way and then just stops there and stays. You know what I mean? It's like such a strange way to look at like Geisha Gone Wild, because you have so much variety of variegation throughout the plant, and you can get some leaves that, like you said, have a really strong presence of that dark purple color, or you get some that have less and less of it depending on, you know, the leaf on the plant. Very, very inconsistent as far as like, you know, how much variegation is on each leaf with Geisha Gone Wild, but consistently throughout the whole plant, you've got that variegation present. So it's pretty wild.
All right. So I think for the sports on the variegation, we've kind of beat that one with a dead horse. We covered a lot of those. Let's move on, because there's a lot of other types of sports out here. One of the types of sports that's kind of interesting is vigorous sports. Now, vigorous sports, you may even see some in your own landscape if you step back and look. You've got your Japanese maple. It's tight and dense. And then all of a sudden, one grows kind of wild and vigorous and sticks out. Some people call it a water sprout. If it's coming from above the graft, that is a vigorous sport. If you take that and graft that, sometimes that's a mutation in the tree that is growing faster than the rest of the tree. And by grafting that, you could have a more vigorous form of the tree that you have. So sometimes in the trade, people who are grafting, say, Macawi etsubusa, you're always grafting from the most vigorous wood. Sometimes you might actually be grafting a vigorous sport.
Right.
And so you have to be careful and continue to watch to make sure that your tree continues on with the characteristics you're looking for. But it's crazy that, you know, vigorous sports aren't something people talk about as much.
Right.
But they're way more common than people act like as well.
Right. And that's interesting too, to think that, you know, over a span of time that you may kind of be slightly altering some of the cultivars out there that may be known for their really slow growth and that really dense compact. And then if you're grafting using that really vigorous scion selection of wood for it, you may actually be speeding up the growth habit to that plant or stretching it a little bit, changing it slightly over the years. And I think that probably happens some just in the grand scheme of things with pretty much all maples, because I mean, you're trying to do an exact duplicate, but depending on where you take the scion wood and stuff like that, there's a lot of conditional things that goes into it. But that's really cool to think about a vigorous sport being a part of that mutation world.
I mean, look out in your landscape. If you see a spot that's just growing really vigorously and the rest of the plant isn't vigorous, that may be a vigorous sport.
Right.
And, you know, most of those don't really have a place in the landscape, because if you look at it and you say, you know, this is, you know, a slightly more vigorous form. I mean, that's what people say with Beni Fushigi and Beni Komachi, that one is a slightly more vigorous form than the other. It's the same thing they say about Hagoromo and Koshimeno.
Right.
I mean, those things are fairly indistinguishable in the trade, and it's hard to tell them apart, but one does grow slightly faster than the other. So, you know, is that big of a deal in the trade? Probably not.
Right.
And does it need to have another place as another cultivar? Probably not. But nurturemen need to be aware of that and making sure that they're grafting from the best spots of the tree, and making sure that you're continuing on the cultivar that you're supposed to. But in some circumstances, if you had a real vigorous sport on a really slow growing tree, you know, it could have some positive advantages.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important. And you guys talk about it all the time about the evaluation period, you know, making sure that if you do find a sport or some type of mutation, that it's consistent. And the only way you're going to know that is to give it time, because you want to see this, you know, this growing for a certain specific amount of time. And if you can hold those characteristics throughout that time, variegation, whatever it might be, growth habit, then you kind of start to begin to solidify it as a new potential cultivar because it's been consistent over a span of time.
Yeah, and one of the ways that evaluation process happens fairly quickly is through the type of sport that can be called a reversion. Now, a reversion can happen on a tree that's variegated. and you've got this beautiful variegated tree, and then all of a sudden, it basically skips a bud in the growth of the variegation, and then you start to get a part of the tree without
Right.
variegation. And you may notice it really easily on something like butterfly. It's a beautiful blue-green leaf with white margin variegation, and then it throws on a reversion, and it's green.
Right.
And that should be pruned out on butterfly. That is a reversion that's a negative that I would prune out because it doesn't add to the tree. It takes away from the tree. It takes away from what we selected from. There's some positive reversions that I really like. Reversions that have lost their variegation. One that's very popular is called Nancy's Legacy. Nancy Fears was the owner of Mountain Maples, and she distributed a lot of stuff that J.D. Veritree produced early on. She was one of the first mail order nurseries, and she loved the reversion on Toyama Nishiki. So this sport mutation that happens on Toyama Nishiki, it's a heavily unstable variegated plant, and when that variegation loses itself, and you've got just that beautiful lace leaf with pink orange spring color.
Right.
I mean, it's a tree that's more sun tolerant, and it has a beautiful pink orange fall color. I mean, it's a very beautiful selection in itself with a weeping lace leaf, and it came about as a reversion.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting to kind of have the mind space enough to understand that just because you've taken away maybe some very specific characteristics that, has made a plant popular, that its reversion still, lends to its beauty in itself. You know what I mean? I've seen some of the most beautiful lace leaves out there. And so if you take away the variegation from that lace leaf, it's still a beautiful lace leaf. Great structure, great color, great leaf shape. So, just because you see a reversion happening on a plant and once it's kind of been established as, hey, you know what, this reversion is really nice, we're going to start grafting this and actually producing it because it's a plant that's worthy to be in your landscape because of its great characteristics, even though it may be reverted from its original form.
Now, the crazy thing is that sometimes the reversion is the original form.
Right.
So in the case of Benny Sheehan, he had that red seedling.
Right.
That was a blood good seedling. Not really. It's just a red Japanese maple seedling that had that sport on it. Well, Benny Sheehan reverts back sometimes to that original leaf. And that reversion is Purple Mask.
That's awesome.
And Purple Mask is a larger leaf. It's kind of got like a mauve red color to it. And it's got beautiful yellow to orange fall color. And it's extremely heat tolerant, just like Benny Sheehan. So that is a winner all the way around. It's actually a more marketable plant for the South. That bigger leaf, that real pretty fall color than Benny Sheehan was, that was a variegated sport.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting to think of it that way, that you could see a reversion and say, I actually like that a little bit, or it works better in different environments. I think especially when you're talking about variegated sports, a lot of times, they're going to need some protection from the hot afternoon sun. They're going to have, the colors are a little bit more sunlight sensitive. So you have to protect them a little bit more in certain landscapes, certain climates. So I think, the reversion, like with Purple Mask, that allows you to take a tree that, is going to push it out into the sun elements, a little bit more versatile in its use in the landscape.
It takes a tree that was more of a collector plant with Benny Sheehan and turns it into a plant that almost anybody could grow in the garden with a red upright Japanese maple.
Exactly.
So, very beautiful. The next one is Prince Charming. That's the reversion off of Hanamatowi. It has got more of a pink red kind of color to it.
Oh, yeah.
For a weeping lace leaf, even when Hanamatowi loses variegation, becomes Prince Charming, it is a beautiful, beautiful weeping lace leaf. It is gorgeous. Now, reversions aren't always positive. Reversions, like I talked about with butterfly, can be very negative, especially if you're trying to have those, the Hanamatowi in your landscape and you don't want Prince Charming.
Right.
The ways to avoid some reversions, we do know what sometimes reversions can be caused from. One of the main reasons that a reversion can happen is from over-fertilization. Using high amounts of nitrogen in your fertilizer in the early spring can actually cause a reversion and cause that mutation to disappear and that reversion to come in. So do be aware that if you have a cultivar that can be an unstable variegated plant. Reversions can happen if you're over fertilizing, and that is a very common thing, is over fertilization of a variegated selection.
And I really think too, just from a collector standpoint, I think, we're all just so kind of enamored by these amazing plants. I think if you have a cultivar that you're as known to have reversions or be prone to reversions, I think it's easy to maintain if you're diligent with it. If you just take your time and every time you're out walking the garden, you check on it, make sure, because if it's just a small little branch and you catch it while it's young, it's easy to just kind of pinch that little leaf off, whatever it might be. But if you're waiting until you have this huge branch that's all green, now you've got to get the saw out. You're trying to cut this big branch out of your tree. It's going to mess up the shape and things like that. So I think there's ways that you can keep, a plant that's prone to revert. You can keep on top of that and make it a little bit more of a stable situation for you.
Now, I'm going to jump back to sports, variegated sports, 1 second. I just thought of another one. Ken pie.
Ken pie. Yeah,
pie is a variegated sport on Osakazuki that happened at Tsukasa maple.
That's an interesting one for sure.
And the leaf mutated. You get a red border around the edge on that variegated sport. But also, it's a shorter, compact tree, completely different shape than Osakazuki. I had to mention that one. It just jumped in my mind about variegated sports, and I'm like, it's almost like it's a variegated broom, which we'll be talking about in a little bit about in other mutations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just crazy, just different. Now, the other one I want to talk about are weeping sports. People in the conifer world are very familiar with weeping sports. They're not something that we see that frequently on Japanese maples because often the hormones on Japanese maples are very consistent in what they do.
Right.
If you've got a dwarf or a weeper, they continue to be dwarf and weeping. But weeping sports can happen on Japanese maples. And I'm going to go ahead and throw out there that I think that the origin of emerald lace was likely a weeping sport or a weeping broom that happened on the cultivar Seiryu.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion that's likely what happened. David Sabo is no longer with us, who found that in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we may never know for sure. But they have the same genetics.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you see a lot of similarities with emerald lace and Seiryu. You have very similar fall color, that kind of dark maroon fall color that they get. And it's that really finely dissected leaf.
The leaf is like any other.
Yeah,
they both have small seeds. They both can be rooted, which is a characteristic of Palmatum subspecies palmatum, rather than Palmatum subspecies matsumuri, which all the other lace leaves are. And they're both super heat tolerant.
Yeah.
Super durable as well.
And vigorous. I mean, emerald lace can get out there so quick. I mean, it's crazy how quickly that can grow. Very reminiscent of Seiryu, one of the fastest growing upright
and that's my theory. There's no facts behind that, but they share similar characteristics, and a weeping sport would make a lot of sense for what we see with emerald lace and Seiryu. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about brooms. Now, brooms are another mutation that we have. It's another type of a sport. Now, you heard me say broom versus witch's broom. Cupid, I actually think, is a broom. It's a compact form that happened on a Japanese maple. And I think there may be different degrees of broomery.
I like it. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I think I could see that. And maybe they just kind of develop too over time.
Exactly.
As that mutation develops and kind of matures, the characteristics may change and evolve with that.
With the witch's broom that happened over at my uncle's house, we called it Little Lamb. There were different levels of broomery on the same broom. And the broom happened, we didn't even know it was there. Right. We drove by it every single day, and it was at my aunt and uncle's home. And my Uncle Danny called me one day and said, "Tim, I've got a witch's broom in my yard. You should come check it out." And I said, "What?" I mean, I was in your driveway just the other day in the front yard, big old broom there, but there are different levels of broomery in the same tree. We grafted from the Titus one, which I actually think was more of what I consider a witch's broom. Mm. Now, the first stage of brooms that I often look at, they don't have short and center notes. They have a compact form.
Yeah.
A good example of this would be English Town. English Town itself is said to be found as a broom in New Jersey at a mall shopping center. And it had a compact form, and you graft it and you have a compact dwarf. It's got a leaf more like a bloodgood, but without short and center notes. The interesting thing is that Englishtown itself can produce a quote unquote witch's broom off of that.
So it's just continuing.
So it continues to start to mutate itself. So if you have an Englishtown, I've seen it multiple times, you can actually find a witch's broom sometimes on the broom Englishtown. I saw it once at Green Mansion Nurseries in Pennsylvania. Then I was at Charlie Morgan's and Amazing Maples in Seattle and saw the exact same broom happening on his Englishtown in his garden.
Dude, that's so wild, man. I love just the world of maples is just so interesting because, I mean, think about that. You're talking about, a broom that is now like maturing into a witch's broom. I mean, the genetics of that are just completely mad science type stuff. I wish I could be behind, like you said, behind the glass and really dive into some of this, the genetics behind all this.
We had a guy at our last open house, and he had a broom on Skeeter's broom.
Right.
And so Skeeter's broom, some people consider a tree like Twombly's or Skeeter's broom to be bud sports. And really what that just means is these are narrow growing witch's brooms. I mean, they have that compact form. They've just been tight, dense, compact form but they stay more narrow. And Twombly's was found what he thought was a witch's broom. He grafted and evaluated, and it grew tall and narrow. I mean, you never know what these things are going to do until you go through that evaluation process.
Right.
And that's the truth with any of these mutations. I mean, you've never known that lily pad was going to be flat and wide.
Right.
You just got to grow it and then find out and see how this tree stands out from other ones. But witch's brooms, to me, have this shortened center node and even get slightly tighter and dense, more dense than the original broom. It's like the mutation almost continuing is the way I look at it. And that's just because of what I've seen on the witch's brooms that I've found. There was a master gardener who found a witch's broom growing on her seedling from Glowing Embers down in Georgia. We grafted it, and there appeared to be different levels of broomery on the same tree. And so sometimes you may find this broom at one stage and think you found the broom, and then years down the road, you may find the broom on the broom that may be its final stage, at least from what I can tell.
Right, yeah.
There may be another stage down the road. These trees live much longer than we do.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it too is that once you've made the discovery of like these mutations we've talked about, and you get into the propagating side of it, it really kind of resets the expectation, I think, once you start grafting it, because now you've got the influence of the rootstock, the vigor of the rootstock. You've got, a lot of other genetic influences into that as well. So you can see a lot of these mutations start to change once you get beyond like the original, exploration or discovery of it. Now you see changes start to happen once you start grafting it. It may be a little more stretched out than you originally expected. The variegation may not be as prominent as you originally expected. I mean, there's so many different variables once you get to the grafting stage of it.
And you got to think too, all these trees, whether it's variegated or it's a broom, was on the original characteristic where you found it. I mean, on a witch's broom, they start to develop this really weird, gnarly curve at the base. It almost looks like the tree is grafted onto another tree. When you like this mutation just starts bulging out and creates this really weird bulge right before the witch's broom characteristic happens. It's crazy. It's crazy when we find these things. By the way, I'm going to go ahead and tell it here. I do have a witch's broom on tattoo that we found.
Oh.
So a cool, possibly one of the slowest growing Macawi types to hit the market yet. So there is a witch's broom on tattoo. Just throwing it out there for all of our listeners. We're in the process of producing it and getting it to market and evaluation as quickly as possible.
That's awesome.
But witch's brooms, they have that bulge to them. They have so many compact forms, and witch's brooms give you something that's special out there in the trade. They make a dwarf version sometimes of the tree that was out there, but they make a dwarf or a narrow growing tree that people can use in the landscape. And the landscape's ever shrinking, so brooms and witch's brooms really serve a purpose. You were talking earlier about grafting. When we graft a Japanese maple, we are putting them on a vigorous rootstock. If you're have a tree that's got some weird bulbs there, it's not going to be growing very fast at all. And it's a dwarf version because it's a broom. You graft that, you don't really know what it's going to do until you evaluate it. I mean, next thing you know, it could be growing tall and narrow, or it could start growing wide and flat.
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't know until you go through that process.
That's why it's so important to do that evaluation, because it takes time. I mean, we get emails and calls all the time. I've got a variegated sport on this, or I've got a broom here, and as exciting as that is, because it's an amazing thing to find and discover, and it's just kind of a wow moment. But it's like, all right, we got to slow down now, because now we need to take a cutting of that, put it into propagation, and kind of see how all those characteristics continue to play out. They may be consistent, and it may be the next greatest cultivar that you've ever seen, and it might be a big hit in the market. But it could also be that it's something that's, prone to reverting, or it could be that the variegation isn't as stable once you start to graft it. So there's things that you have to consider with all of these different mutations and so many variables to play with, especially when it comes to the conditions like that.
Now, one of those trees that was found by a customer of ours was Blackston's broom. A customer found this growing in one of his trees and allowed us to come down. We actually shot a video with it. It's a video on our YouTube channel. The MrMaple Show is called What is a Witch's Broom? And you can go there and see the original broom in the tree, see what we're talking about with this broom-like mutation. And now we're in the valuation process with Blackston's broom, trying to figure out how this tree distinguishes itself from trees like Kunar Pygmy and Tiny Tim and some of the other dwarf greens that are out there in the trade today.
Yeah. So tell me again, which one was it where you and Matt were running and jumping and trying to? I wish we had that video footage.
So there was back in the day, there was no one else to video besides me. Right. And Matt. So, if we were both running and jumping and trying to get cuttings out of a witch's broom, then it was, in fact, something that wasn't filmed, thankfully. Shayna is a witch's broom that happened at the University of Villanova's Department of Public Safety building. There's an old red Japanese maple, and the broom stands about 9 feet high. So, I mean, you have to get a nice little running jump to go up and try to grab a cutting out of it. And we go in and hand cards out to all the police officers in the Department of Public Safety building. But every 15 minutes, there's another shift change. So we were going through a million cards, just handing them out. Who are you and what are you doing on this campus?
These people are like, what are these guys doing out here?
Yeah. So we're out there filming in the rain underneath the original Shayna, out of leaf. And, it's definitely a very fun and eventful time. Shayna was a witch's broom that was found by Dick Wolf and introduced jointly with him and Billy Schwartz, and named after Billy Schwartz's daughter, Shayna, which is Hebrew for beautiful. And Billy has since become one of the legends of Japanese maples and Japanese maple witches' brooms. In fact, if you're interested, go check out our podcast on the Billy Schwartz experience. We talk a lot about witches' brooms in that podcast with Billy Schwartz. He's a crazy fun guy. And if you're more interested in witches' brooms as a whole, too, we have a whole podcast all about witches' brooms called All About Japanese Maple Witches' Brooms. So check that one out as well.
But yeah, we thought it'd be cool to just kind of get in here and chop it up with you guys. Talk about how Japanese maples can mutate and change in your environment, even on a plant that you've had for many, many years. A sport can happen there. A broom can start to form. And so, it's always a possibility. It's kind of like when Jim Carrey said, so there's a chance. So you're saying there's a chance, right? There's always a chance for a sport. There's always a chance for a broom.
And whenever you come visit Mr. Maple, look for sports.
Yes.
I'm not going to get mad. I will tell you, the late, great Don Shadow, I spotted a witch's broom in an Acer Negundo. He was driving us down to go check out one part of his nursery. And I spotted an Acer Negundo on the side of the road that had a witch's broom. And I said, that was a witch's broom, an Acer Negundo. He said, no, it wasn't. And he came back later and said, yeah, it was. And then the same thing, whenever I was going around with the late, great Tom Cox, I found a variegated sport on one of his dogwoods. And he was like, I can't believe you found that. And he was almost mad because he walked around that tree every single day but I was the one that spotted the sport in his tree.
Yeah.
And so if you find something variegated that's a sport or something at Mr. Maple, let me know. I mean, I'm super excited about that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have something in your landscape, that you've got that's got a broom or a variegated sport or something, take some pictures, contact us here at the office at Mr. Maple. We'd love to chat with you and kind of help you with the evaluation process, see if it turns out to be something amazing.
It's best to send photos to Mr. Maple Questions. That's Mr. Maple Questions with an S at gmail.com. Our office ladies all the time are getting photos from our customers asking about, hey, what is this mutation going on in my tree? Mm-hmm. Sometimes, guys, we have some videos that might help you out. If you see something like Peve starfish getting flat growth in the summer, that's just irregular summer growth. If you see something like Higasiyama getting solid green leaves on the secondary flush in the summer, again, irregular new growth there in the summer. That's not a reversion or any type of sport. That's just a characteristic of that tree itself. So don't worry about that. But feel free to send your photos of your, would-be mutations to MrMapleQuestions@gmail.com. And we'll see, is this something cool? And we'll see if we can't help you with some of the ideas on how to stabilize and turn this mutation into something special.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, guys, we really appreciate you guys hanging out with us today on another podcast here, the Mr. Maple Show podcast. You can also see this in video form on Mr. Maple Show. So go subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We do a lot of cool content over there. We do cultivar highlights. We do a lot of videos about like these mutations and variegation, showing you how to prune, showing you how to all these different gardening techniques. So we really enjoy hanging out with you guys.
Y'all, thanks so much for listening. Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.